The evening sun was sinking behind the city skyline, painting the streets in a soft amber haze. Claire stood by the cafe window, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on the glass as she waited for her coffee. Outside, the world moved in slow motion. Couples laughing, cars humming, life happening as if nothing had ever broken. But inside her chest, something fragile trembled quietly, a weight she carried behind every gentle smile. It had been 2 years since she'd last seen him. 2 long years of silence that felt like a lifetime. She told herself she was over it, that she'd moved on, healed, rebuilt. But healing, she had learned, doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means learning how to breathe with the ache still inside. Then she saw him. Across the street, in that same golden light, he appeared, familiar yet distant. His laugh was the same. His walk still slightly hurried, like he was always chasing something he couldn't name. And beside him was someone new. A woman, her hand tucked gently into his. She laughed, and he smiled the way he once smiled at Claire. That effortless, heart-stealing smile that once felt like home. For a moment, Claire's heart forgot how to beat. The world blurred, her reflection trembling in the window's glass. Every memory she'd locked away rushed back like a flood. Midnight talks, shared coffee cups, whispered promises that never made it to forever. Her throat tightened, her eyes burned. But then she did something she didn't expect. She smiled. It wasn't bitterness and it wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something heavy yet graceful. A smile that said, "I'm happy you're okay even if I'm not." She watched them cross the street, hand in hand, fading into the crowd. And as they disappeared, Claire took a deep breath and whispered softly to herself, "You did good. You loved and you survived." Her coffee arrived, warm between her trembling fingers. She took a sip, tasting the faint sweetness of something she once feared she'd lost forever: peace. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the moment she learned how to smile, even when it hurt. It all began on an ordinary autumn morning, years before that moment by the cafe window. Claire had just moved to the city, chasing dreams bigger than her confidence. She was the kind of girl who carried quiet hopes inside her journal and found comfort in rainy days. And that's where she met him, Ethan. He was sitting in the corner of the old library cafe, headphones on, scribbling something on a napkin like the world outside didn't exist. She remembered how he looked up and caught her staring, and instead of turning away, he smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that makes your heart skip a beat because it feels like he already knows you somehow. Their first words were clumsy, their laughter soft. But it didn't take long for their worlds to blend. Morning coffees turned into late-night walks, and text messages turned into phone calls that lasted until sunrise. Claire had never known what comfort truly felt like until she found it in his voice. Ethan wasn't perfect. He had his storms, quiet moods, moments where he'd drift away as if lost in his own battles. But Claire loved him through them all, believing that love was meant to heal, not fix. She learned his favorite songs, his fears, his dreams. And somewhere in between all of that, she gave him parts of herself she didn't know how to take back. But time, as it always does, began to change things. The calls became shorter. The silences grew heavier. She could feel him slipping away, one unanswered message at a time. She tried to hold on, believing love could still find its way back. But sometimes, love doesn't end with anger. It ends quietly, with two hearts drifting apart while still beating for each other. The last time she saw him before everything fell apart, it was raining. He couldn't meet her eyes when he said, "Maybe we're just not right for each other anymore." And she smiled, the same way she did at the cafe years later, pretending that her world wasn't falling apart inside. She watched him walk away under the streetlight, his figure fading in the rain, and realized love doesn't always break with a sound. Sometimes it just disappears, softly, like a goodbye whispered to no one. The days that followed were a blur of silence. Claire's apartment, once filled with laughter and half-empty coffee mugs, now echoed with the sound of her own breathing. Every corner held a ghost, his jacket draped on the chair, the playlist they made together still whispering through her speakers, his favorite mug sitting untouched by the sink. Heartbreak has a way of making time stand still. Morning bled into night, and night into something quieter, heavier. She tried to fill the spaces he left behind, with work, with books, with friends who said all the right things but never really knew what to say. She smiled when they asked how she was doing, lied when they told her she'd move on soon. But deep down, she knew healing wasn't about forgetting someone. It was about remembering them without falling apart. Some nights she would scroll through old photos, her thumb hovering over the delete button. But she could never do it. Not yet. Each picture felt like a fragment of a life that once felt infinite. A version of her that still believed forever meant something. Slowly she started writing again. Letters she'd never send. Words she'd never say out loud. It was her way of bleeding without leaving scars. Turning her pain into sentences that only she could understand. One night in her journal she wrote, "I don't miss him. I miss who I was when he loved me." That line stayed with her. Because it was true, she didn't long for him anymore, not entirely. She longed for the version of herself that smiled a little wider, laughed a little louder, and believed that love was enough. And then, like the changing of seasons, life began to move again. She cut her hair. He started going on walks alone. She learned to cook for one, to find quiet joy in things that didn't need to be shared. There were still days she woke up with his memory sitting heavy in her chest, but they became fewer, softer. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, unremarkable moments, like the morning she realized she could walk past their favorite cafe without feeling her heart break all over again. She didn't know it then, but that was the day she began to love herself again, the same way she once loved him, fully, gently, and without fear. It was a soft Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the air feels too calm to carry bad memories. Claire had no plans, just a book in her bag and a quiet desire to feel the sun again. She wandered the streets of downtown, the same streets that once held shadows of their love. The city had changed, or maybe she had. Either way, it no longer hurt to be there. She stopped by a small cafe she hadn't visited in years. Their cafe. The one with the fogged windows, chipped tables, and the smell of roasted coffee beans that always reminded her of home. For a brief second she almost turned around. But something in her said it was okay to sit down, to reclaim a place that once belonged to her heartbreak. The barista smiled, not knowing that this was the same spot where two people once promised forever. Claire ordered her usual, vanilla latte extra cream, and sat by the window watching the sunlight spill onto the pavement. For the first time in a long time she felt light. Then, fate did what it always does. It arrived uninvited. She looked up and there he was. Thin. He looked almost the same, maybe a little older, a little calmer. He wore that familiar navy jacket she once gifted him, though it fit differently now, like time had stretched both of them in ways they couldn't undo. For a moment her breath caught. But before her mind could gather itself, she saw her, the woman walking beside him. She was beautiful in a quiet, graceful way. The way she held his hand, the way he leaned toward her. It was all too familiar. Claire's heart didn't shatter this time. It just sank like a stone into still water. No chaos, no storm, just a quiet ache. Ethan didn't see her. Maybe that was mercy. Claire's eyes followed them as they crossed the street, the golden light wrapping around them like a memory she was finally ready to let go of. And in that fragile moment she smiled, not because she was fine but because she was finally free. Her eyes shimmered but no tears fell. That was the difference between then and now. Back then she broke. Now she simply let go. As their figures disappeared into the crowd, she whispered to herself almost like a promise, "You did love him, right? Just not forever." That night the city was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Claire sat by her bedroom window, the lights dim, the air heavy with thoughts she didn't try to escape from anymore. She had seen him, really seen him, and somehow it didn't destroy her. It didn't send her running back into the arms of what was. It just settled somewhere deep inside, peaceful and still. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends, work reminders, a life that had kept moving even when her heart once stood still. She smiled faintly and turned the screen over. Tonight wasn't for the noise of the world. Tonight was for remembering and releasing. She poured herself a cup of tea and stared at the steam curling into the air. In it she saw fragments of her story, the beginning, the middle, and this quiet end. The girl who once broke was now whole, not because she forgot but because she learned how to live with the cracks. There was beauty in that. In knowing pain didn't ruin her, it reshaped her. She thought about Ethan, about how love can be real even when it doesn't last forever. She didn't hate him. In truth, she never really could. He had loved her in his own imperfect way, and for a while that was enough. Maybe he had found the kind of peace she once wished for him. And maybe she had found hers too. Outside her window rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, like a song she'd once known by heart. Somewhere between the raindrops she whispered a quiet goodbye, not to him but to the version of herself that had waited, that had hoped, that had hurt. When she opened her eyes, a faint smile curved her lips. It wasn't the forced kind she wore at that cafe. It was gentle, real. The kind that comes from finally understanding that endings aren't always sad. Sometimes they're just beginnings in disguise. She picked up her journal, the same one filled with old letters and unfinished thoughts, and wrote one final line beneath them all. I saw him today, and for the first time it didn't hurt. Then she closed the book, turned off the light, and let the night carry her into a new chapter, one she no longer feared to begin.